What's up, horror people? This is our last video. Uh, so, just gonna go over some of the last discussion board questions and maybe recap just a little bit of what we did during the semester. I'll start with these discussion board questions. I'll try and pull them down here so I can see them a little bit better. One of the first questions was about fire and water and these different elements, and really good discussion here, both about fire as being one of the things I think that we found out about the way that O'Connor uses elements in this particular novel is that it's not clear, right? So that sometimes earth and fire and water and air, all of these things that we have typical associations with, can also have the opposite connotations. Fire and water are really good examples, and Tim and Diana talked about this a little bit, which is that fire can be destructive, obviously, but it can also be purifying. Water can drown someone, but it can also baptize someone. So she's playing on these associations with the duality or the bifurcation of elements, and I think you guys did a really great job talking about that. The question about how women function in the novel, where are the women that function in the novel? This was a really interesting conversation. I'm so glad that you guys talked about it. I think one of our favorite comments was from Avery, who connected Bishop with the woman at the hotel. And she, as one of the only people that really cared about Bishop or wanted him to do anything, was interested in that child as a person. And so that there was at least some kind of nurturing presence, and it was a woman. I think I said, if you're a woman in an O'Connor text, be careful, because she's probably going to rain some vengeance down on you. So maybe it's a good thing we don't have women in this novel, but she certainly was one of the good ones. The question about who is a better parental figure, Rainbow or Tarwater, got some pretty strong reactions. I think Cecilia summed it both up when she said they're both terrible, which is, I think they're both terrible in equal measures and in equal ways. I don't know that O'Connor was. I don't know if you could ask Flanger O'Connor who would she rather have as a father. She'd probably choose Tarwater. I mean, Tarwater was at least nominally interested in getting the boy ready to do something that he believed in that could change the world, and it turns out at the end of the novel he did just that. But they're both pretty awful as parents, pretty awful as dads, and really I think escaping both of them was the best thing that happened to Tarwater. So a good conversation there. We have this one gay character in the novel who turns out to be a child predator. I don't know how else to say it. And it's difficult to hold O'Connor accountable in some ways for representations of GLBTQ characters. But I do also think using rape as one of those, and especially the way that the rape is portrayed as a plot device, you guys sort of definitely had problems with that, issues with that, especially because it was this Lavender man, who in a lot of ways I think is the physical embodiment of that stranger that's been talking and speaking to Tarwater throughout the novel. And if you go into O'Connor's letters, and please God don't, but if you do, you'll see that she very much meant for that person to be the devil. And so it is probably not a surprise that someone as devoutly Catholic as O'Connor, who had all of these belief structures, when she was trying to think of, well, who could the devil be in a manifestation, it would be a homosexual gay dude that goes around raping children. So that was unfortunate for us. Where do you see inevitability in this novel? This was really interesting, especially the conversation that went back and forth with Meredith and Ben, because this is one of those tenets of Gothicism, right? Is that sense of impending doom and dread that you kind of know when a story begins, like, okay, this is probably going to happen. And you either love or hate O'Connor, I think, is one of the ways that this goes. And this is the hinge sometimes, is like, oh, I hear the criticism, I pick up an O'Connor novel and I'm like, oh my God, I know what's going to happen now. It's just inevitable. And then other people are like, well, I know what's going to happen. And so the artistry of it is in her sort of showing me the way, even though I know what the ending is. And this is why we go to scary movies, and we know bad things are going to happen, but we want to see how they happen. And so people that love O'Connor really do love that inevitability part of it. The question about why why O'Connor would withhold names from the novel, and Zach said, I like this. I like that it's withholding the name. I can focus on the character. I don't have to think about the name. And because O'Connor is so Dickensian with names, it feels very leading sometimes when she tells us someone's name. You're like, oh, okay, well, I know what she's referencing there. And so the back and forth with Zach and Cameron and Coleman on this, where, does it help knowing a character's name? Yeah, sometimes it does. But is it too much help? Yeah, sometimes it is. So that was a good conversation too. What symbolism do you take away from the names in the novel? So Mary Frankie started us off with thinking about Tarwater as a really good example of that kind of Dickens name, which is that when you think of Tarwater, you think of something that used to be clean but is fundamentally now polluted. And there's just all sorts of, you could write a paper on all of the different connections between why Tarwater works as a name in this way for this particular family and how that works. And so that was a good conversation as well. What do you think the message of the book is? Do you think the message of the kind of, this is the $64,000 question, and I think you have to make a distinction, or you have to make a decision when you talk about what a message for an O'Connor book is, because uniformly I think O'Connor is trying to get across the same message. Again, if you read her letters, and please God don't, but if you do, you can see she's like, this is exactly what I'm trying to do. Now, that's the intentional fallacy that new critics have said that's a bad idea. Like, it doesn't really matter what an artist says. Also, they could be lying. See Faulkner. And so saying what the message of the book is, you really do have to make a decision whether you want to be the one to decide what the message is, or you want to take O'Connor at her word. And then to say, the second question would be, do you think it goes beyond that? So the second part of that question was, do you think the book speaks beyond authorial intent? And listen, I've taught this enough that yes, I mean, if you don't know who wrote this novel, which is kind of what new critics want us to do, is just put on blindfold and pretend like we don't know who's doing any of this stuff, then yeah, I've taught this to students who are like, wow, this is a profound critique of Catholicism and the limits of doctrine. And I mean, O'Connor would rise up out of grave and stab you in the eye for saying that to her. So it certainly can, right? Now, whether you think that is meaningful kind of falls on your critical apparatus. So that's a really interesting question. The final one was, did you like the book? And I think the consensus, other than Celia, who's one of those O'Connor people, is just like, I love O'Connor. And they're just people that are like, I love her. I don't care. The consensus was like, yeah, there are parts of it that I enjoyed, but I really wish we could have talked about it. And Jesus Christ, me too. I mean, that was sort of the thing that I was missing in all of this. If I could have chosen a book that we could have talked about in class out of the ones that we talked about, I would have chosen this one, just because it really does give a whole range of emotional reactions, and people tend to get really analytical about that. So I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to do that. Overall, I think this was a really, great class. I have fond memory. It feels like 7 years ago that we were in class together, but I have fond memories of us sitting in class and talking, and you guys were so smart. You're always there. Thanks for sticking in with me. The beginning, the middle, the end, the bitter end. I mean, it has been a very difficult transition. You guys have been lights out on the discussion board. I so appreciate all of your comments. It gives me something to get up and read and live for every day. So that's been really fantastic. I'll say that, what we would normally be doing right now is we'd be kind of summing up. We'd be like, here are the overall conclusions from the course. I don't feel comfortable doing that because that's a collaborative discussion. I usually like to have that with you guys while we're talking about, like, what did you think about the class? What were some of the books you liked? What were some of the things you didn't like? What should we not have done? So I won't presume to, because this is a collaboration. This is a conversation. It's not just me. And in some ways, I'm the least important part of it, because at the end of the class, the students really do kind of define what the successes and failures and what were the major sticking points and what were the major conversations that we had. So, but I will say that one of the things I think that came out, pretty regularly when we were talking in class is we come back to these texts, we come back to these speculative horror texts for a lot of reasons. I mean, some of them are pretty obvious. We like to be scared. Fear is one of those things, catharsis, all the things we talked about in the beginning. But one thing that became clear, I think, throughout the run of the class, really from you guys and your conversations about it, was that we also come back to these texts because they do a kind of cultural work for us, and they articulate anxieties that we have when what we believe is true inside of ourselves, as in our identity, is at direct conflict with what other communities or other constituencies or other identities we share tell us we should be or what we should be feeling. This was, obvious in all of the texts that we read. Certainly you can find it in Sing and Buried Sing, Visitation of Spirits, Mongrels, and The Violent Buried Away. So those were our 4 units. And I think by witnessing that, by being able to see that play out, sometimes in very horrific ways, right? Either through transformations, Horace's transformation, and then possession, the unnamed narrator Mongrel's transformations, or his desire for transformations, Tarwater's desire to transform into a prophet and his rejection of it, in Sing and Buried Sing, Jojo's rejection of his gifts. All of these things really are profound meditations on the conflicting identities between an individual and different kinds of cultures and societies that ask them to own certain things or to be certain things that they find incompatible and cannot reconcile with who they know to be. And because of that, I've started thinking about this more and more. One of the reasons that I like horror, one of the reasons that I come back to horror, one of the reasons it's a story that I like to hear, even though I know the ending a lot of times, is that there's a great deal of comfort that we find in these other characters who are going through similar kinds of transformations, who are going through similar kinds of difficulties, who are articulating these anxieties and their horrors, and we can share that burden, we can see that burden, we can recognize that burden, and we can see ourselves in it. And so speculative texts, but especially horror speculative texts, do almost more than any kind of text I know, do a lot of cultural work in asking us to meditate on those differences and how we own those differences and how we are connected more than how we're separated. So it's really a strange sensation to finish something like that and feel that catharsis, that release of pity and fear that Aristotle talked about with Greek drama and Greek tragedy, and then and to feel better and to feel more whole and to feel more human. I mean, it is one of the great kind of mysteries of horror fiction, or maybe one of the great ironies, is that when you read about a werewolf, you feel more human. When you read about a monster, you feel more human. When you read about a creature, you understand your humanity more acutely. And I think that's something that I keep coming back to. Now, is it the main conclusion to draw? I don't know. That's up to you guys. I mean, we talked so much about individual, but we talked about region. We've talked about relationship to other kinds of cultures, identities, the relationship and identity might have to a national discourse, gender, sexuality, class, all of these different markers of identity. So whatever it is that gets refracted or reflected with horror, I think it is true that those differences and those disruptions and those gaps are where we really find the useful and fruitful work of what horror does. Okay, let me stop there. I have looked at all of your projects. I'm so excited to spend more time with them and respond to them, but I've at least got to look at each one of them, and they're really diverse and beautiful and creative, and kind of run the gamut of all sorts of things. So I'm really proud of that, and I'm really excited to get into it. Listen, I know a lot of you are graduating and trying to come up with something really soon here to send to you guys, but I hope everything goes great for you guys this summer. Please send me emails, keep up with me. I just love hearing from you and knowing that all is well. So I will see you guys soon. I really hope that we are all back in a space together again and are able to see you and hear you and watch you talk about books again sometime. So until then, stay scary. Bye.